We interact continuously with mathematical filters operating in the background of our screens, silently reordering the digital information we consume. In 2020, a massive study conducted with Meta tested what happens when you turn these engines off. Researchers deactivated the algorithmic feeds for thousands of Facebook and Instagram users during the US election. The result was zero detectable effect on political polarization. Data scientists faced a contradiction. The mathematics of engagement optimization dictate that these systems shape user reality, yet the empirical data showed no change. The 2020 study measured the removal of a system. It analyzed what happens when an algorithm is deactivated, but it did not account for the structural changes that occurred when the user was first exposed to it. In 2023, an independent team of researchers ran a field experiment on the platform X. Instead of looking at deactivation, they tracked users moving from a chronological baseline into an algorithmic environment for the first time. You cannot mathematically isolate the effect of a variable by removing it if the presence of that variable has already altered the baseline environment. The research team took 4,965 active US-based users and randomly assigned them to either a chronological or algorithmic feed over a 7-week period. The critical variable was the transition itself, a specific cohort of users moving from a strict time-based timeline to X's default engagement-optimized feed. This chart maps the shift in political attitudes, measured in standard deviations. For users switched to the algorithmic feed, the data shows a 0.111 increase in prioritizing conservative policy goals over liberal ones. This shift extended to current events. The algorithmic cohort showed a 0.08 increase in the belief that investigating Trump was unacceptable. Yet metrics for absolute partisanship and affective polarization stayed flat, showing a precise null effect. A mathematical sorting mechanism altered which policies users viewed as critical, without changing their declared political identity. The algorithm doesn't flip a user's core identity. It performs a targeted reshuffling of issue saliency. To understand how this happens, we have to reverse engineer the structural mechanics of the feed itself. The control environment is the chronological feed, where information distribution is linear and ranked strictly by time. The treatment environment is the algorithmic feed. Here, an optimization engine replaces time, maximizing user history, post features, and context to generate engagement. Replacing a temporal baseline with an engagement baseline mathematically guarantees a bias in the content supply. Researchers captured this bias by using natural language processing to analyze the first 100 posts seen by users in both experimental cohorts. Algorithmic feeds do not just sort the same information differently. They generate distinct mathematical realities designed for user retention. To maximize retention, the objective function filters out what it classifies as low engagement noise. Traditional news media falls into this category. In the algorithmic feed, news posts dropped in visibility by 15.5 percentage points compared to the chronological baseline. Instead, the system elevates high-friction political activism. Activist accounts surged, seeing a 5.9 percentage point increase in visibility. In the 2023 X ecosystem, this amplification had a specific directional skew. The algorithm prioritized conservative content for both Democrat and Republican users. Exposure to biased content is an acute event. When a user closes the application, exposure ends. However, the substitution of factual reporting with polarized activism cannot explain a persistent shift in political attitudes without a secondary long-term behavioral trigger. The mechanism at work is network topology mutation. The algorithm coerces users to change the structure of their digital connections. We can observe this by shifting the focus from the content users saw to the actions users took regarding account following behavior. This data visualization tracks those new connections. Initial exposure to the algorithmic feed caused a 0.18 standard deviation increase in users following conservative political activist accounts. The algorithm generates new edge connections in the user's network graph that endure even after the sorting function is removed. Users who remained in the control group on the chronological feed exhibited zero structural mutations to the networks. The system leverages temporary content exposure to induce a behavior, prompting users to hard-code the algorithm's biases directly into their personal network structure. The final phase of the X experiment reveals why the meta-study found no effects. Researchers took a second cohort of users, people already using the algorithm, and switched them back to the chronological feed. Switching from the algorithmic feed back to the chronological feed produced a precise null effect across all political attitudes. This exact null effect is what led earlier researchers to assume algorithms lack political power. Deactivating the algorithm deletes the sorting function, but it does not sever the persistent network edges the user formed while the algorithm was active. When a user returns to a chronological timeline, that timeline is now saturated with the political activists they were previously convinced to follow. Activating the algorithm alters the network structure. NX. Computational social science cannot rely on deactivation studies to measure digital influence. The sequence is clear. The algorithm changes the view changes the user's connections, and those connections alter the user's baseline reality. The risk to democratic discourse lies in the architectural network scars left behind by these optimization engines. These connections represent a structural change to the user's social graph, an architectural shift that remains long after the initial prompt has vanished. Researchers and platform architects must evaluate algorithmic interventions as enduring structural shifts rather than the temporary changes previously assumed. We must stop evaluating algorithms as passive filters and start treating them as active, persistent architects of human belief.